democratic means, possibly now more than ever. And politically, what last night showed us is he can be beaten by those means. Tim Miller once served as spokesman for the RNC. He's now a writer at the Large for the Bulwark, and he joins me now. What's your takeaway, Tim?
That guy can be beat, Chris. That was not 84 Reagan or 08 Obama or Jordan.
Not 95 Jordan either. Yes, exactly.
That was a long, rambling, incoherent speech. He had no clear message. He was obsessed with himself. I like how you focused on the performance of it. He looked and felt old and tired. I did notice the face coloring difference in those three speeches. Jumped out to me as well. But look, if he were to be elected again, he would be older at the end of his term than Joe Biden is today, right? So,
correct.
Like, the age side of this is part of the message. So this is what I saw from last night's speech. I mean, it wasn't. It did not. There was not anything there that should scare Democrats if the Democrats can put up a forceful campaign against him. And I think you see that in all the data, too. There is an overconfidence at the RNC. They, for some reason, think that, sorry to kill the sports metaphors, like they think that they're winning by 3 touchdowns, and they're not. Like, they're winning by 1 touchdown.
That's right.
And he is beatable in every piece of data that you see. It's not a Democrat problem. Democrats in the Senate races and in governor's races are winning in all of these states. They won in the midterms. There is a ton of issues that he's vulnerable on that he didn't want to talk about last night, particularly abortion. And so the question is, can the Democrats run a vigorous campaign to beat a guy that is not Teflon, that is not, winning by a landslide right now?
That point about being up a touchdown, I think, is great. I'd say 2 scores actually at this point, or maybe a touchdown. But it's not. The game's not over. And on that complacency, they're just exuding it all over the place. Like, hey, let's put Marjorie Taylor Greene, the one who went to an actual Nazi conference. Let's put her right there in the president's box. They don't have to do that. Let's have a guy who slapped his wife on tape introduce Donald Trump. Slapped his wife on tape. You can go watch it. She slapped him first. I will note the full context here, but I particularly don't think that's very masculine or cool or admirable or the kind of person I would put in a convention. That's just me. Those are people who are just a little high on their own supply.
Yeah. Look, my colleague Jonathan Glass wrote about this today. There's a difference between confidence and overconfidence. And I think they showed at this convention overconfidence. It's true in the people you just named, in the J.D. Vance pick, who brings nothing electorally and adds some serious electoral vulnerabilities, particularly in women's issues, particularly his comments about abortion and women that have been abused having to stay in marriages. You saw it in the Tucker Carlson is also there last night after his insane period of pro-Russophile conspiracies that he's been pushing. These guys are full of vulnerabilities, and it was on display. And I think that if you for my other colleagues that were there and our colleagues at MSNBC who are there, if you talk to the delegates, everyone there feels like this thing is done already.
Yeah.
And that is crazy. And overconfidence leads to complacency. And I think that there are a lot of potential vulnerabilities that have not yet been exposed. There's 3.5 months left.
Yes, as Scripture said, pride goeth before the fall, and that is what I feel right now. And the only 2 things that have sort of given me, that have lifted the kind of ominous, thrumming, bad feeling sensation, is that speech last night where it was just a reminder of this is who this guy is, and he's not changing, and he is self-obsessed, and he's totally undisciplined, and he's got some really keen political instincts, and they've got some issues on their side for sure. This is a divided country, a close election, and he's winning right now, but this is not a Colossus. 2 things here. One is the polling, I think, is actually interesting. Obviously, Biden's age has been a huge deal. So look at this polling. This is actually sort of gratifyingly rational polling, which is that the percentage of people who say the candidate's too old for a second term goes up over time, which is yeah, that checks out. But Trump has gone from people saying 44% of that saying to in July now 60%. He's going to be older than Biden is right now. What is that? What is Donald Trump plus the possibility of
genuine
decomposition look like? That's a genuinely terrifying thing to conceive of.
Yeah, look, no, it is extremely scary to think about Donald Trump with his henchmen in a second term in decline, in mental decline. George Conway started Psychopath PAC this week to try to highlight that potential threat. But I would say this, look, everybody knows my view at this point. I think that if you elevated somebody like Kamala Harris to the Democratic ticket, also just as a political matter, the age issue becomes totally reversed. Yeah. And all the things that are troubling the Democrats right now become a huge problem for the Republicans. And maybe his top issue that's helping him outperform Democratic senators on the ballot becomes a massive vulnerability, along with rule of law, along with abortion, along with all, the insurrection, along with all of his other vulnerabilities.
Abortion. He had a lot to say last night when he was in his, I'm going to say a few words at a Mar-a-Lago wedding mode. Had nothing to riff or improvise on abortion, interestingly enough. Tim Miller, thank you very much.